The woman in the dirt the road was silent except for the buzzing of flies. They circled over a broken body lying on the ground. Her skin was pale and stretched tight against her bones, her clothes torn and soaked with dust. She had been there. For hours, maybe days. No one stopped, no one cared. The alien widow had once been part of a family. Once she had a husband and children. Once she had laughter and songs in her home. But war had taken everything. Her husband cut down by soldiers. Her children stolen by raiders, and her people had abandoned her when she could no longer carry her weight. Now she was nothing, a widow left to starve by the side of the road. Her chest rising slowly, each breath a struggle. Villagers passed, some glanced at her, others pretended not to see. One woman muttered, "She is already dead," and walked faster. A man spat in the dirt near her head. Useless mouth, better gone than fed. No one wanted her. No one wanted to waste food on a broken widow. The sun beat down, hot and merciless. Sweat mixed with dust on her face, and flies crawled along her lips and eyes. She tried to wave them away, but her arm trembled and fell back into the dirt. Too weak, her belly growled in pain, empty for too long. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. Mixing with the dirt, she whispered to herself, "Let it end. Please, let it end." But it did not end. Not yet. The sound of footsteps echoed along the road. Heavy boots, slower than the quick steps of the villagers. Someone was coming. Someone who did not rush past. She forced her eyes open, her vision blurry from heat and hunger. The shape of a man appeared against the bright sky. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in travel-worn clothes, and as he stepped closer, she froze, a human. Her people had whispered many things about humans, that they were dangerous, that they were cruel, that they would take what they wanted and leave you broken. She thought for a moment that this was the end, that he would finish what the world had already started. The human stopped near her, looking down. His face was shadowed, tired, a scar across his cheek. But his eyes were not cruel. They were sharp, full of thought, but not cruel. For a long moment he said nothing. The widow waited, her body shaking. She could not speak, her throat too dry, but her eyes begged silently if not for help. Then for a quick end, anything to stop the hunger. The human crouched beside her. His shadow fell over her face, blocking the burning sun. He reached into his pack slowly, carefully, as if unsure of what he should do. From the bag he pulled out something wrapped in cloth. The smell hit her nose, rich and warm, food. It was only a small piece of bread, old and hard, but to her it looked like treasure. Her mouth watered, though she had no strength left to reach for it. She thought he would eat it in front of her. She thought he would laugh, break it, and walk away. But instead, he lowered it to her lips. Her eyes widened, her dry mouth opened slowly, and the bread touched her tongue. Her teeth tried to bite, but they were weak. The human broke it into smaller pieces. Gently pressing them into her mouth, she chewed, forcing herself to swallow. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She had forgotten the taste of food. The human said nothing. He just watched her. His jaw tight, his face unreadable. Every bite she took was one less for him. She knew it. She could see the hollowness in his own cheeks, the way his shoulders sagged from exhaustion. This was his last meal, and yet he gave it to her. The widow looked at him with wide, trembling eyes. Why? She wanted to ask. Why save me? Why waste food on me? But no words came, only more tears. Around them, the road was still empty. The villagers had gone, the flies had returned, but none of that mattered now. For the first time in days, she was not invisible. For the first time in days, someone had seen her. And not just seen saved her. The widow tried to lift her hand. It shook as she placed it weakly on the human's wrist. Her voice cracked like dry earth. Why me? The human did not answer right away. He looked out at the road, at the horizon where the sun was sinking. Then he looked back at her and spoke. His voice was calm, heavy with something she did not understand, because no one else would. Those words struck her harder than hunger ever had, because they were true. Everyone else had left her to die. Only this stranger, this human, had stopped. Her tears would not stop. She closed her eyes as more bread touched her lips, and in that moment, lying in the dirt, swarmed by flies and saved by a man she had once been taught to fear, the widow felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The last meal. The human sat beside the widow in silence. The road stretched empty around them, broken stones and dust glowing under the fading sun. He had given her his food, the very last piece of bread in his pack. Now nothing was left for him, but he did not move. He only watched her eat, his face hard, but his eyes soft. The widow chewed slowly, every bite heavy with both relief and guilt. She could feel the hollowness in her stomach, fighting against the food. Her body begged for more, but her heart whispered in shame. This was not hers. This was his. Why would a human give up his last meal for a stranger? Why for her, a widow? No one wanted. Her hand shook as she held the final crumb he offered. She hesitated, staring at the rough skin of his hand. It was the hand of a fighter, scarred, dirty, strong. But instead of striking, it gave. Instead of taking, it shared. She swallowed the crumb and her throat burned. Tears slid down her cheeks once again. The human looked away as if he did not want to see her cry. He pulled his empty pack close and tied the strap. Hunger waited for him too, but he pushed it aside, finally. She gathered enough strength to whisper, "You had nothing. Yet you gave me everything." Her voice cracked, almost too faint to hear. The human turned his head, his expression unreadable. He shrugged lightly, as if what he had done meant nothing, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He was tired, he was hungry. Yet he had chosen her life over his own comfort. The widow tried to lift herself from the dirt. Her arms trembled, her legs refused. The human reached out, steadying her shoulder. "Slow," he said softly. "You are weak. Do not rush." His voice was low, from dust and travel, but it carried patience, something she had not known for a long time. She leaned on him, her head brushing against his arm. The smell of sweat and steel clung to him, but beneath it she sensed warmth, a strange kind of safety. Her people had told her that humans were selfish and cruel. Yet here she was, alive because one had chosen otherwise. The road was growing darker. Shadows stretched across the land, and the cold of night began to rise. The widow shivered, her body fragile after days of hunger. The human noticed, unclipped the jacket from his own shoulders and draped it over her. She blinked at him, confused. "You will be cold," she murmured. "I'll survive," he answered simply. The words echoed inside her. He had given food, now warmth. Piece by piece, he was giving away what little he owned. And for what, she wondered. What did he want in return? Her people would have demanded payment, service, obedience. But this man asked for nothing. He only stood beside her like a silent guardian. The buzzing of flies faded as the air cooled. The widow's body relaxed for the first time in many days. The human searched the road, scanning every shadow. He was alert, watching for dangers she could not even see. His eyes never rested, even when hers began to close. But before sleep claimed her, she forced herself to whisper again, "Why? Me." Her weak voice cracked in the stillness. The human sighed through his nose, still staring at the road because no one else would stop. He said again, firm, "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind." Her eyes opened wider. His tone carried weight, the weight of memory. He too had been abandoned once. She realized he too had known hunger, fear, loneliness. And that pain had made him different from the others. It had made him stay. The widow's chest ached as fresh tears came, not of sorrow, but of something she had forgotten: gratitude. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she bowed her head against his arm. He did not push her away. He only adjusted his stance so she could lean more comfortably. The night deepened, the stars scattered above them. The human stomach growled loudly in the silence. She heard it, and guilt stabbed her heart again. He had nothing now. He had given her everything. Her hands clenched weakly at the jacket. Around her, tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow I will walk. I will not be a burden to him. I must not, but for now. She allowed herself to rest, her body weak, but her spirit flickering back to life. Because of him, because of a human who chose to give instead of take, the human remained awake long into the night, his hand never far from the blade at his side. He kept watch as the widow slept. Hunger burned inside him, but he ignored it. Danger whispered from the shadows, but he faced it, and deep inside, where no one could see, he knew he had made the right choice. His last meal had given her life. And in some way, it had given him something, to a reason to keep walking. First bite of hope, the widow woke to the chill of morning air. Her body stiff, her lips dry, but her stomach no longer screamed in pain. It was weak, still empty, but not the endless hollow it had been before. She had eaten, even if only crumbs. And that had been enough to keep death away for another night. She turned her head slowly. The human sat a few steps away, back against a stone wall, blade resting on his lap. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. His body slumped as if every muscle ached. But he was still awake, still watching the road. He had not rested. Not even for a moment. He had stayed awake so she could sleep. The widow stared at him for a long time. No one had done such a thing for her. Not since the war took her husband. Not since her own people abandoned her like garbage. Her throat tightened, and she whispered softly, "Why do you protect me?" The human did not answer at once. He looked out at the horizon, where the first light of dawn painted the sky in gray and red. Finally, he said, "Because you deserve to live." The widow shook her head weakly. "No, I am nothing. I have nothing to give you." He turned his eyes to hers then, sharp and steady. "You are still alive." That is enough. Her heart pounded at his words. Alive? Yes. But for what? She had been ready to die in the dirt, and yet here he was, forcing her to live. A tiny flame sparked in her chest. It was not strength, not yet, but something like it, something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The human rose to his feet, adjusting the strap of his pack. It was lighter now, emptied of food, but he carried it all the same. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The widow looked down at her legs, thin and trembling. She pressed her palms to the ground and tried. Her body shook violently. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed back into the dirt. Shame burned her cheeks. I cannot," she whispered. The human stepped closer and crouched in front of her. "Then lean on me," he said simply. He bent down, sliding her arm over his shoulder. With a grunt, he pulled her up. Her weak frame pressed against his strength. Her feet dragged at first, refusing to obey, but slowly, with his support, she began to take small steps. Each movement was pain, but also victory. Each step was proof she was still alive. The road stretched ahead, endless and broken. Ruins of houses lined the path, reminders of lives shattered by war. The widow's eyes stung as she saw them. Her own house had once stood proud, filled with laughter and children's voices. Now only dust and silence remained. She clung tighter to the human's arm. If she let go, she knew she would fall. But he did not complain, not once. He bore her weight as if it was nothing. Hours passed, the sun rising higher. The widow's breath came heavy, sweat running down her face. More than once, she begged him to stop, to leave her. "You waste your strength on me," she said through tears, but the human only shook his head. "Keep walking, one step, then another." His voice was not harsh, but steady, the kind of voice that could push even the weakest forward. At last, they stopped near the shadow of a broken tower. The widow collapsed against the wall, gasping. Her legs felt like fire. But inside her chest, that small flame had grown brighter. She had walked. She had survived another morning. The human sat beside her, silent, pulling a flask from his pack. He tipped it toward her lips, letting a trickle of water wet her mouth. The liquid was warm and metallic, but to her it tasted like life. She leaned back, staring at the man beside her. "You are strange," she murmured. The human raised an eyebrow. "Strange?" "Yes," she whispered. "Humans. They say you only take, but you give." He chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "Not all humans are the same. Not all of yours are the same either." The widow lowered her gaze, shame filling her chest. He was right. Her own people had left her, discarded her. It was not a human who had done that. It was her kind. The thought cut deep, but also set her free. Maybe kindness and cruelty were not bound to race. Maybe they belonged to the choices of each soul. Her stomach rumbled again, empty but quieter than before. She remembered the bread, the taste of it on her tongue. The gift he had given her without hesitation. That first bite had not only filled her body, it filled her with something she had not dared to believe in. It had given her hope. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the jacket he had wrapped around her. The fabric smelled of him, sweat, iron, smoke, but also safety. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might come. That maybe she was not destined to die forgotten in the dirt, all because of him. A stranger, a human, the man who had given away his last meal. Asterisk. The walk together, the sun climbed higher, burning down on the ruined road. The widow leaned against the human as they moved forward step by step. Every bone in her body begged her to stop. But his steady grip on her arm forced her forward. He carried her weight without complaint, his steps strong and even. Her legs trembled with each attempt, sometimes dragging like dead branches. She stumbled more than once, her knees striking the stones. Each time she whispered, "Leave me. I am slowing you." But the human only tightened his hold and pulled her back to her feet. "You are still moving," he said firmly. "That means you are not done yet." The road twisted through empty houses, burned walls leaning like skeletons. Once these places had been alive with children and traders, with voices and laughter. Now, silence echoed through the ruins, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps and the distant call of crows. The widow's eyes searched the shadows nervously. She knew danger lived in places like these, hungry animals, desperate raiders. Things worse than hunger, the human seemed to know it too. His hand often rested on the hilt of his blade, his eyes scanning every corner. He moved with the awareness of someone who had survived too many battles. Each step was both careful and fearless. The widow clung to him, not only for balance, but because he made her believe she might be safe. Hours passed, the heat pressing down on them. The widow's throat burned with thirst, her lips cracked. At last, the human guided her toward a half-broken fountain, its basin filled with dirty rainwater. She reached for it, but he stopped her, shaking his head. He knelt and dipped a cloth into the water first. He wrung it out carefully, letting drops fall into her mouth instead. It was barely enough, but it was clean. She blinked at him, surprised again by his thoughtfulness, even here, where desperation ruled. He chose caution over carelessness. When the sun began to fall, they stopped near the edge of a shattered barn. The human lowered her gently to the ground, setting his Packed beside her, he stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders, the weariness clear on his face. The widow watched him, guilt pressing on her chest. She whispered, "You could go faster without me." He looked down at her, his eyes sharp. "Do you want me to?" Her lips parted. No sound came. She shook her head quickly, her heart thudding in fear. The human nodded once, sitting beside her, then stopped saying it. He said simply. They rested in silence, broken only by the sound of wind moving through the barn's broken beams. The widow leaned back against the wall. Closing her eyes, the human sat guard, his gaze never leaving the road, even when exhaustion pulled at his body. He refused to close his eyes. The widow noticed and whispered, "Why do you never sleep?" "Because something has to watch the dark," he answered. Her throat tightened. No one had ever watched the dark for her before. She pulled the jacket tighter around herself, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. When night came, they lit. No fire. The human whispered that flames could draw danger. Instead, they sat in the cold, listening to the distant howls of beasts. The widow shivered violently, her thin body shaking. The human saw and without a word, shifted closer, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, steady and warm. She stiffened at first, startled by the closeness, but the warmth seeped into her, calming the trembling of her bones. Slowly, she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. The beat of his heart echoed in her ear, strong and steady. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to sleep. The night passed without attack. When dawn broke, the human nudged her awake. She opened her eyes groggily, surprised to see him still alert. "You did not sleep again," she said, her voice rough. He only shrugged. Not important, but she could see the weight in his eyes, the exhaustion in the lines of his face. He carried more than her body. He carried her survival, and it was wearing him down. They walked again, the path now leading through a stretch of wild grass. The widow stumbled less, her legs beginning to find strength again. It was slow, painful, but progress all the same. The human noticed and gave the faintest nod of approval. "You are stronger today," he said. Her chest swelled at the words. No one had told her she was strong since her husband was alive. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to that small spark. By midday, the widow asked softly, "Where are we going?" The human glanced toward the horizon, his expression unreadable. "Somewhere safer than here," he answered. "Will it be far?" "Yes," he said, "but you will make it." His certainty made her breath catch. She had believed she would die in the dirt. Now he spoke as if her future was still waiting for her, as if she was not a burden, but a survivor. The widow pressed closer to him as they walked. Every step hurt. Every step reminded her of her weakness. But every step beside him also reminded her she was not alone. Together, they moved through the wasteland. Together, they walked toward something beyond hunger and dust. And though the road ahead was long and full of shadows, for the first time since the war had taken everything, the widow believed she might reach the end of it, not alone, but walking together with him. Whispers of the past. The sun was low when they stopped again. The sky burned red, the air heavy with the smell of dust and smoke drifting from far-off fires. The human found a broken wall still strong enough to block the wind. He helped the widow sit, her legs shaking after hours of slow, painful walking. She leaned against the stone, her breaths ragged. Her body felt like it was made of glass, fragile and ready to shatter. But inside her chest, something different stirred, a spark she hadn't felt in years. She was alive, still alive, because of him. The human sat nearby, laying his blade across his knees. His eyes never left the horizon, scanning the land for danger. He was silent as always, but not cold. It was the silence of someone who carried. Too much in his heart, the widow watched him for a long time before whispering, "Do you not wish to know who I am?" The human's eyes flicked to hers briefly, then back to the road. "You are someone still breathing," he said simply. "Everything else can wait." His words cut deep. To him, her worth was not her past. Not what she had lost, it was that. She was still here, still fighting. Her lips trembled, and the dam inside her chest began to break. "My husband," she started, her voice cracking. She swallowed hard, but the words tumbled out. "He fought in the war. He stood with our people when the sky burned, but he did not return. His body was left on the battlefield." And I, her breath hitched, tears filling her eyes. "They took my children too." Raiders came in the night. Their screams still echo in my head. I see their faces when I close my eyes. I tried to follow, I tried to fight. But they were gone, and I was weak. Her voice broke into sobs. The memories poured from her like blood. From a wound, they called me useless after that. My tribe, my neighbors, they turned their backs on me. "She cannot fight, she cannot work, she cannot feed," they said. So they left me, in the dirt. To starve, they left me to the flies. Her body shook with grief. Her hands clutched her chest as if to stop her heart from breaking again. The human did not speak at once. He let her cry, let her voice fill the silence. Then, slowly, he sat. His blade aside and moved closer. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. It was not the touch of pity, but of strength. "You are not useless," he said. His voice low and steady. "They were cowards, too afraid to carry the broken. It is not you who should feel shame. It is them." The widow's eyes lifted to his, wide and wet with tears. His gaze did not falter. It was firm, and in it she saw something she had never expected: respect. Her breath shook, but her sobs softened. She wiped her face with trembling hands. "No one has said that to me," she whispered. "No one has ever said I was not a burden." The human's lips pressed into a thin line. "They were wrong," he said. "You are still here." That is strength. The widow lowered her head, overwhelmed. For so long she had believed she was worthless, a shadow left behind. But now, hearing him, the heavy chains around her heart began to loosen. They sat in silence for a long time. The night grew darker, the stars spread across the sky. The human remained watchful, but his presence beside her felt heavier now, just a guard. But something more. Someone who had heard her pain and had not turned away. At last, she whispered, "You speak as if you know this feeling." To be left behind, the human's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the distance. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he murmured, "I do." The widow tilted her head, waiting, but he did not share more. His silence was heavy, carrying the weight of old wounds. She did not press him. Some scars were too deep to show in the open. But knowing he understood that was enough. In his silence, she felt less alone. The night was cold, colder than before. The wind slipped through the broken wall and cut against her thin body. She shivered violently, teeth chattering without a word. The human removed the cloth around his neck and wrapped it around her shoulders. She gasped softly. "You will freeze. I've been colder," he said simply. Her throat tightened again. Each time he gave something of himself. Each time he shielded her. She felt the flame in her chest grow. It was small, fragile, but no longer dying. Hope. She leaned closer, resting her head against his arm. He did not push her away. Instead, he adjusted his position, keeping her steady as the wind howled through the ruins. She closed her eyes, her voice a faint whisper. "Thank you." It was the first time she had said those words to anyone in years. The human gave no reply, but she felt the faintest shift in his posture. A quiet strength that told her he had heard. As sleep claimed her, the widow realized something. The world had taken everything from her husband, children, home, dignity. But it had also given her this moment, a night where she was not alone, a chance to speak her pain and not be silenced, a man who had given her his last meal and more, a human who had whispered without words, "You are still worth saving," and, for the first time since the war began, she believed it might be true. The danger returns the night was silent at first. The widow slept against the human side, wrapped in his scarf, her breathing soft and uneven. The human sat awake as always, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, his blade resting across his knees. Every shadow could hide danger, every whisper of wind could carry threat. He had learned long ago never to trust silence, and he was right, because silence did not last. At first it was only a faint sound, the crunch of gravel far off, then another. Heavier, closer, the human's head snapped toward the noise. His hand tightened around the blade's hilt. Something was moving. More than one, the widow stirred. Sensing his sudden tension, her eyes fluttered open, fear already spreading across her face. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He pressed a finger to his lips, commanding silence. His eyes burned with focus. Sharp and ready, the noises grew louder from the shadows of the ruined barn. Shapes began to emerge, small at first, but quick, crawling low on the ground. Glowing eyes flashed in the moonlight. Scavenger beasts, thin, mangy, their ribs showing through their skin, drawn by the smell of weakness, of hunger, of death. The widow gasped softly. She knew these creatures. They hunted in packs, they circled the wounded, they tore apart the dying, and they had smelled her. Her trembling body, her fragile breath had called them here. The human stood, pulling her behind him. His blade gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The beasts hissed, low and guttural, padding closer with snapping jaws. Their eyes locked on the widow, the weakest one, the easiest kill. The widow's chest heaved, her knees buckled as she clung to the human's arm. "They will kill us," she whispered, panic breaking her voice. The human did not look at her. His voice was calm, hard as stone. "Not while I stand." Then the first beast lunged. The human moved faster than the widow thought possible. His blade swung in a sharp arc. Steel meeting flesh. The creature shrieked and fell, blood staining the dirt, but more came, rushing from the shadows. Teeth snapping, claws scraping stone. The human gritted his teeth, stepping forward to meet them. He slashed, kicked, struck with raw strength. Every movement was survival carved into his muscles. But there were too many, far too many. The widow screamed as one beast broke past him. Its teeth flashed toward her throat. She stumbled back, raising weak hands that could not protect her. But the human spun, his arm hooking the creature mid-lep with a roar. He slammed it into the ground and drove his blade through its chest. His body was bleeding now, cuts across his arms and legs from snapping jaws. Still he fought, his breaths ragged. Sweat pouring down his face. The widow could only watch, helpless. Her heart shattered as she realized he was bleeding for her. He was risking his life because she could not stand alone. More beasts circled, their growls echoing in the ruins. The human's blade dripped red, his shoulders shaking. He was tiring, and they knew it. The widow's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she cried. "Why fight for me? I am nothing." The human struck another beast down, his voice sharp and fierce. "Because you are not nothing." His words cut through the chaos like thunder. The widow froze, tears running down her cheeks. Those words, no one had ever spoken them for her before. Not her people, not her tribe, not anyone. The pack hesitated now. Circling but uncertain, the human's fury, his defiance, unsettled them. He stood tall, though his body bled, blade ready, eyes blazing. He was one man against many. But he looked unbreakable. At last, the beasts began to retreat, one by one. They slunk back into the shadows, hissing and growling. They had lost too many. And the humans' fire was too much. Soon, only silence remained again. Broken bodies lay around them, the ground dark with blood. The widow trembled, sinking to her knees. Her chest heaved with sobs as she reached toward him. The human lowered his blade. Breathing hard, his body swaying with exhaustion, blood ran down his arm, soaking his sleeve. But his eyes softened when they met hers. "You are safe," he said quietly. She shook her head violently. "No, you are not safe. You are hurt, all because of me." Her hands reached for his wounds, but trembled too much to help. The human placed his hand gently over hers. Steadying them, his touch was warm, despite the blood. "I chose this," he said firmly. "You will not be abandoned again." Her tears fell freely. Splashing against his scarred hand, he had given her food, given her warmth, carried her weight, and now he had shed his blood for her, in the darkness of that broken place. The widow understood this human was not only saving her body, he was saving her soul. The night was not silent anymore. It was filled with her sobs, his labored breathing, and the whisper of something new between them, something stronger than hunger or fear. A bond forged in blood and sacrifice, and though the danger had passed, the widow knew the world would throw more shadows at them, but for the first time, she did not fear the dark. Not while he walked beside her, not while he fought for her, not while he whispered with every strike, "You are worth saving." A new dawn. The night had been long, filled with blood, fear, and desperate struggle. The widow sat trembling in the ruins, the human beside her, his blade still wet with the fight. His breaths were heavy, his body wounded, but his eyes stayed. Sharp, even in pain, he had kept his promise. She was safe. When dawn finally broke, pale light spread across the ruined land. The widow blinked against it, her heart heavy with exhaustion. But in that first breath of morning, she realized something. She was alive, not by chance, not by luck, but because someone had chosen her life over his own comfort. Because a human had given her food, warmth, and blood, the human rose slowly, his body stiff with wounds. He did not complain. He only reached down and offered his hand to her. The widow stared at it. Scarred, strong, steady. Then she placed her fragile fingers into his. He pulled her gently to her feet. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice tired but calm. She nodded, though her legs trembled. "With you," she whispered. "I can, together." They moved along the broken road. The rising sun painted the sky gold. Each step was heavy, but it was no longer just survival. It was progress. It was proof that death had not claimed her. Not yet. She leaned against him, but this time her shame was less. This time she walked not as a burden, but as someone learning to stand again. Hours passed, the land slowly shifting from ruins to stretches of wild grass. Birds circled in the distance, and the sound of water faintly reached their ears. The widow's heart lifted at the sound. She had forgotten what hope felt like, but now it beat inside her chest with every step. At last, they reached a small stream. Its water was clear, running over smooth stones. The human knelt, cupping water into his hands and lifting it to her lips. She drank greedily, cool relief washing through her body. When he drank after her, she noticed how carefully he left enough for her first. Always giving, always placing her before himself. When they rested, she sat close to him. Her voice was soft but steady as she spoke. "You have given me everything: food, water, warmth, your strength." Her eyes welled with tears. "I do not understand why I was left to die. My people called me worthless, but you..." She swallowed hard. "You look at me as if I matter. The human looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he said quietly, "Because you do." He turned his gaze to the horizon, his eyes distant. "I have seen too many left behind, too many forgotten. I could not walk past you. Not when I knew I had something to give." Her chest ached with his words. She lowered her head, tears dripping onto her hands. No one had ever spoken such things to her. Her husband had once loved her, but after the war, she had been nothing but a shadow. Now, because of this human, she felt like a person again as the sun climbed higher. They walked once more. Every step hurt, but each step carried less despair. The widow's spirit grew stronger. The hunger in her body was still sharp. The pain in her legs still heavy. But in her heart, a seed had been planted. Hope, fragile but alive. By the time the sun began to fall again, they reached the edge of a small camp. The smoke of fires curled into the sky, and figures moved in the distance. The widow froze, her hand tightening on his arm. Fear rushed through her chest. What if they turn me away? What if they see me as my people did useless? Her voice shook, her eyes wide with panic. The human placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "They will not decide who you are," he said, his voice steady. "You have survived. You have walked this far. You are stronger than you believe." His words sank deep into her chest. For the first time, she wanted to believe them. She wanted to believe that she was not just surviving, but living. As they approached the camp, a few strangers came forward. Their eyes wary, the widow shrank back, ready to hide, but the human stepped in front of her. His presence a shield. "She is with me," he said firmly. The strangers looked at his scars, at the blood on his blade, at the determination in his eyes. They did not argue. Instead, they stepped aside and let them pass. Inside the camp, the widow sank onto a blanket offered by one of the women. Her hands shook as she accepted a bowl of warm broth. Tears blurred her vision as she lifted it to her lips. The first real meal in so long. But she could not take the first sip without glancing at the human. He sat nearby, watching her quietly, his face calm but his eyes tired. She whispered, "I am alive because of you." The human shook his head. "No. You are alive because you chose to take the bread, because you chose to walk, because you chose not to give up." His voice softened. "I only gave you a chance. You kept it alive." Her tears fell freely. The broth warmed her body, but his words warmed her soul. She bowed her head deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would." The human did not answer with words, but his faint smile was enough. A smile that said he had no regrets, that his last meal had been worth far more than his own hunger. As night fell over the camp, the widow lay wrapped in the warmth of a real blanket, her body still fragile, but her spirit alive. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she did not pray for death. She prayed for tomorrow, because now she believed tomorrow would come, and she would not face it alone.